Good to see you online, Jocelyn. You're going to make up our quorum. Kia ora tātou and welcome to this annual Plan Council workshop of the 6th of May. We had to change the timing of this briefing, this workshop, due to having to go to Palmerston North for a further discussion about our possible future water entity. So we therefore have a few people away today. I won't go through them, but hopefully we'll be recording this session, so anybody who missed it today can catch up with it later. Cool. So I'll pass on over to Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. Kia ora, everybody. We have the next hour to go through a few slides with you with regards to the 25-26 annual plan. So supporting myself today, or me today, is Paula Reardon, our business partner. Online we have Cheryl Gavin, who you'll be familiar with, as well as our respective GMs. So look, as I go through the slides, please, if you have any questions, please raise them as we go. This presentation was sent out yesterday, so it is available in each LG Hub if you prefer to follow it on your device. Otherwise, it's on the screen. So the objective of today is it's really to make public the process that the council has gone through to develop the draft annual plan for 25-26, as well as indicating what the draft increase in the rates revenue after growth is in 25-26 from 24-25. So this presentation is really designed. It is on the website, it is publicly available, and it does just provide some transparency about all the work that council and officers have done to get to this stage. Okay. So look, very quickly, this slide is showing cat's out the bag, so that the draft annual plan that council will consider on the 29th of May is a rates increase of 6.9%. That's after growth. There's some slides further on we will go into more detail, but this slide is actually showing where does Kapiti sit relative to councils in the Wellington region. As you can see, this slide is showing, this is the latest information available at this point in time, but it just compares the Wellington Regional Council's draft rates increase today compared to what they have in their published LTP. As we can see, Kapiti is sitting with the third lowest rates increase proposed for next year in the Wellington region. For the most part, most councils have reviewed their budgets through their annual plan process and are proposing increases less than what they had published in the LTP, with the exception of Wellington City Council, Greater Wellington and Masterton. So this is really just for information. Okay, so in terms of the process, so what process have we done? What has council done in terms of developing the draft annual plan? So the very first thing that council officers did was actually looked at the published budget for year 2 of the LTP for 25-26, and the first step in the process is to look at those budgets relative to what we're experiencing this year. So what are our costs in 24-25? Of those costs, what's flowing through into 25-26, and is the budget sufficient to meet those costs? So we do a line by line review to just make sure that our starting position is actually fully funding our costs, like like everybody else, council has cost pressures year on year. So that's the first thing we do. The second thing we have a look at is we look at our capital program. What is all the work that we're doing on the capital projects in 24-25? What is that looking like? How's that impacting the 25-26 position? We're looking at interest rates. We're looking at assumptions that we've made around our debt modelling as well as our interest rates. So we have a look at all of that. And then the last thing that we do is the LTP, the published LTP assumes inflation indices in each of the 10 years. Standard practice that comes from a Burl report. So what we do is we get a revised report from Burl in October every single year. So we uninflate our LTP budgets and reinflate with actual inflation, and then we look at what is the forecast inflation for year 2. So that's the starting position, just really flexing our current budget. Then what we did in the process is we did a review, and we'll go into more detail, but SLT started looking at each activity and did a review by activity. Once we had finished the first step, readjusting for inflation and capex and interest and identifying cost pressures, that actually set us at 10.1%. Versus a financial strategy which had a 7% rates increase. So SLT undertook a review of all the costings by activity using a framework and identified opportunities to reduce rates, which were then tabled with the councillors. Once we had worked that through with our councillors, we looked to see did any of those initiatives trigger the council's significance and engagement policy. So if you do anything to your LTP budget, if the change is sufficient that it triggers the significance engagement policy, you have to actually consult. And so we worked through that, and none of the changes that we've made to the budgets actually did trigger the significance and engagement policy. In parallel to that, we always look at our fees and charges. So our stock standard practice is to increase our fees and charges by local government cost index, and then we have a detailed review of all the fees and charges. Are there any new fees that we need to charge for, or were there changes to fees and charges that were different to LGCI? They could be less than LGCI because the increase is set by legislation, or they could be higher than LGCI. So we look at all those exceptions and we work through that with the council. And then we worked with an annual plan oversight panel, and we developed we call it the annual plan information campaign, but effectively we developed an annual plan brochure to communicate to the public, to our ratepayers, what the annual plan will include and what the rates increase is proposed to be for 25-26. So that's the process that we worked on. We started it in September, concluded in November, and then had another look at it in February this year. So just by way of background, so this chart is really straight out of our long-term plan document. It's showing, so with a long-term plan, we have a whole lot of assumptions, and that's detailed in the long-term plan. And our assumption when council adopted the long-term plan was that in year 2 we would have an increase in the rates revenue after growth of 7%. So this chart is just showing how we get from 24-25, which is the current year that we're in, to a 7% rates increase. And we assumed an uplift in costs for personnel. We assumed an uplift in our depreciation. So we have a capital works program. We're building assets that increases our depreciation, plus we have a revaluation program which increases the fair value of our assets. Those two together lifts depreciation. We also have a financial strategy that is aimed at reducing debt, and year 2 of the financial strategy is closing that non-funded depreciation gap of $3.5 million. So that effectively is an increase in our rates revenue. We made some assumptions around interest. We've taken on more debt. Interest rates are high, so we assumed an uplift in interest year on year, plus inflation. So those were the upward pressures to our rates revenue, but we also identified that we would have some some reduction, some downward pressure. So we consulted on transferring our older persons housing to a community housing provider. The target date of that transfer was December 2025. And so the LTP takes money out of the CAPEX program because you're no longer renewing our older persons housing stock. And the cost of the older persons housing it is in part funded by rates. So we've assumed that we've transferred the stock to a community housing provider, so we've got a savings in rates. So that's what the LTP assumed. We also assumed a reduction in rates because the NZTA provides us with funding towards our access and transport networks. NZTA just provide us funding. We split that between, we allocate that funding across capital projects as well as OPEX maintenance. The program was revised. That has translated into more revenue expected from NZTA. We've increased the allocation to OPEX, which means that we reduce our need for rates funding. So that's had a positive impact. We had some other movements, some other cost increases, security, energy, so that was taking us up a little bit, and so that translated to, from the LTP's perspective, of a uplift of 8.1% or a rates revenue requirement of 116 million. When you consider the growth in our rating unit database, we have assumed in the LTP that our rating units will increase, our rateable units will increase by 1.1%. In percentage terms, it is a 7% increase year on year to the rates revenue after growth. So that's what was factored into the long-term plan. This slide is almost identical, but this is the Local Government Act requires councils to set a long-term plan, and for years 2 and 3 of your long-term plan, you must do an annual plan. In which case, during that process, you must revise your financial assumptions, you must revisit your strategy, and where you need to make changes, you must make those changes, you must revise your budgets, and if those changes are significant, you must consult. So this slide is actually showing what we've done to our year 2 of our long-term plan. So the starting position is exactly the same. So if I use my pointer, so we start with what is the rates revenue for 24-25, which is our current year. So it's 107,438. We looked at our personnel costs. So as I said, the first thing we did is we looked at 25-26, and we looked for cost pressures. So we've got cost pressures on our personnel. So that translates to 3.1%. So we've got $3.3 million cost pressure on personnel. We looked at the same thing with depreciation. What are the impacts of the capital works program this year? Revaluations, what impact is that having on depreciation? We're sticking to the financial strategy, so we're still looking to close the non-funded depreciation gap of $3.5 million. Interest rates have come down. We're not delivering as much as the CAPEX program, so we've still got an upward pressure on rates from interest, just not as high. We do have the impacts of inflation flowing through. As we all know, our inflation is not CPI. Our basket of goods is completely different, which is why we use the inflation indices provided to us by Bill, which is an independent report telling us what is the inflation for the goods and services we procure. So we had that impact. We also had there was a central government consultation. Council is having to pick up water levy charges from the regulator Te Mata Arawai as well as the Commerce Commission. So some of those charges that was funded by the Crown is now being pushed onto local government, and as a result of that, it increases our rates revenue requirement. We haven't made any changes to the 25-26 draft annual plan regarding the older persons housing. We're still assuming the transfer, so we've still taken renewal funding out of the capital budget, and we're still assuming a reduction in or not having as many OPEX cost related to that housing because we're assuming the transfer. We've looked at the program with NZTA, and we've looked at the program, and we're allocating some funding from NZTA to OPEX, which is reducing the rates requirement. So that red bar is actually a reduction in the rates revenue requirement. And as I said before, at this point, when we looked at all of that, it actually put us at a rates increase of 10.1%. So we reviewed the activities, worked with the councillors, and put some options on the table. And so that equates to 3.1 million.
Are you still on the slide? Darryl was wanting to check.
Oh. There we go. Sorry. Can you do the
Yeah,
clicker?
sure,
I'm
sure.
sort of changing both. Sorry, I'd moved on. So this slide is the
spotted, Darren.
25-26 rates increase. So where I got to is I got to the 2.9%. So this is a key point. So up to, can I just use that? So up to that point, when we looked at our actual cost pressures, and we kept some of our assumptions the same, up to that point there, the increase to the rates was sitting at 10.1%. And we knew the financial strategy said 7%. So that's why we undertook the review of the activities. And I'll go through that with you. So with council, we identified $3.1 million to take out of the budget.
So I just thought after this slide would be a good point to pause for questions.
Sure. Yeah.
Have you finished the slide?
Almost.
Not quite. Let's finish the slide first.
So we identified just under $3.1 million of rates reduction options to take out the budget. We agreed that with council, which left us at a rates revenue increase of 116 million. So we've gone from 107 to 116. We had a growth forecast in the rating units of 1.1. We've actually seen so far year to date, the actual increase in the number of rating units that we have is an increase of 1.4%. So we've got higher growth. So when you look at the increase after growth, we actually end up at 6.9%. Happy to take questions.
There might not be any, but I just think it's good for us to pause. I did have one. I wasn't sure whether I needed to ask it, but when you talked about the Taumata Arawai costs, do we also have extra compliance costs with wastewater? Are they in place yet? Not yet.
Taumata Arawai has been around for, I think this is year 3 or 4, so we increased budgets, I think last year or 2 years ago to bring some of that online. The $300,000 is the levy. Taumata Arawai now charging all councils a levy to fund their work. So that's the change. So up until now, the government have been funding. There was sort of establishment phase. Now they're into operations. We're funding there, and it's based on population. There's a calculation to derive an amount, and ours is about 300,000. And there's Commerce Commission is about maybe 50k, smaller number.
Mm.
Is it based on population, that 300,000?
Yeah, there's a formula that they use to work out your share of their cost.
That's quite a lot.
Yeah, I don't know the total operating costs they're applying, but 25
But even
million.
for us,
25.
that's a significant expense.
Yeah.
What percentage on rates would that be, Mark?
So 325 is 0.3%.
Yeah, that's 1/3% we're spending on our Taumata Arawai levy compliance, which, yeah, I mean, government could pay for that department, couldn't they? In theory.
Yep.
Cam.
Cool. Thank you. I realise it's probably been explained to us in that previous meeting where we looked at all the costs and bits and pieces, but can you just remind me on the basis for the 3.2% increase with the personnel costs? So I'm sure that question
Yes,
is going to come
certainly,
up.
certainly. We will come to it to the next slide. So
Okay,
if
I'll
I
get
if
to
I
it.
can
No
when
worries.
I get there, I'll definitely answer
Great.
that.
Thanks, Mark.
Liz?
Yeah, thanks. Look, just for the benefit of people listening in to this session, we bandy this term unfunded depreciation about, and I don't think people really understand what that is. And I'm just wondering whether it's worth just touching on that for a second in terms of what it represents, how it came about, and what impact it's having on our rates increases at the moment.
Good suggestion.
Yeah, sure, certainly. So
Your subject is unfunded depreciation, and your time starts now.
all right. So so look, in terms of when council constructs, builds, purchases a brand new asset, we fully fund that by way of debt. And then what we do is we recover that cost by way of depreciation. So depreciation is really where you spread the cost of an asset over its full useful economic life. And the useful economic life of our assets do vary from 25 years to 75 to 85, depending on the nature of the asset. So when you spread the cost of the asset over its life, effectively what you do is you recover that cost by rates. So you have an asset and you spread the cost of that asset over its useful life, and the depreciation is an expense. And when we look at what costs do we need to recover by way of rates, depreciation is a cost because it's effectively repaying the cost of that asset, and it's also linked to what we call intergenerational equity. So what we've done in the past is we've had very new infrastructure assets. So we haven't actually, although we've had depreciation, we haven't looked to fully fund our annual depreciation through rates revenue. So in the past, the council has deliberately reduced the rates revenue below what it needs. So it's unfunded some of the depreciation. So the annual cost of an asset hasn't fully been funded by the council.
So in other words, ratepayers have been let off lightly in the past. You could argue that.
Look, in terms of the Local Government Act, you need to have a balanced budget, and you don't need to fully fund your expenses when it's prudent not to do so. And so the council today made the decision not to fully fund the depreciation of new assets as it wasn't necessary, but in the passage of time to speed up the funding of that depreciation so that when those assets do reach the end of their useful economic life, we've recovered the costs through rates. So it was a deferred program.
I think there's a bit more to it than that if we're going to go down history lane. So we had the Green Line strategy, which was to catch up on our unfunded depreciation.
Yes.
And then COVID came along. And that's when we kind of started to try and lessen the load on, it was kind of a COVID response to try and lessen the load on residents. And then we had Three Waters, and that got us even more a little bit behind. So there were a couple of external factors that meant we fell off the rails a little bit, not by no fault of our own, in terms of that strategy we had to fund depreciation. And now we're just trying to get back on track. That's how I would describe it.
But it does have an impact on our rates now because we've got that catching up to do.
Oh, yeah.
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 So there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? The chickens come home to roost eventually, and so now we're making up for the leniency we showed in previous years.
Very well put, I think. What do you think, Mark?
Perfectly put. Look, the other point, another important point, and it's one that we emphasise all the time. So for every dollar of annual depreciation that we're not rates funding, we're borrowing. And so the cumulative amount of debt sitting on our debt book is approximately $58 million. So by not fully funding depreciation, we've incurred $58 million worth of debt. And so the financial strategy is geared at reducing debt. So by fully rates funding the depreciation gap of $3.5 million, it means that we are not incurring $3.5 million of debt in 25-26 to fund operating costs.
So, excuse me, Mark.
Just checking
yeah, sorry.
online.
Yeah, sorry.
Jocelyn, I'll come straight to you after Rob, okay?
So, Mark, in effect, council really established a loan in lieu of paying depreciation off. We had a loan and we've just paid that loan back, so to speak, and now we're just going back to normal. Is that right? Instead of paying depreciation.
Yeah. So look, there are a number of reasons for the day, and the Three Waters reform contributed to that. But essentially the rates weren't increased enough to fully cover the costs, and so so you work out what your total operating costs are, which includes depreciation, and you're either funding that through rates. And if you've got a shortfall, you're taking on debt to fund that because you've still got those costs. So in the past, the council has taken on debt to fund operating costs.
Thank you.
In other words, you're using debt to pay for the bread loaves.
Jocelyn? Yep, you're unmuted.
Yeah, hi. Yes, so thank you. So I'm just wondering for a little bit more explanation on the 1.5% that relates to other movements. I know in one of the next slides it talks about software licensing, power and security, but could we have a little bit more of an explanation about that and whether or not there are any projects that have been cut or reduced?
Do you want to just hold that until we get to after that slide? Can we hold that question?
Perfect.
And we'll get an answer as soon as we get to the end of
Okay.
that slide.
Okay.
Just so we've got a bit more context. Those of us who can't skip forward.
There it is, right there now.
Thank you. So I'm on slide 7. So look, what slide 7 is doing is it's really comparing the two waterfall charts. It's the waterfall chart which showed the assumptions in the LTP versus the waterfall chart which is showing the cost pressures and reductions for the draft 25-26 annual plan. So the very first thing is so the starting position is your rates income for the current financial year of 24-25, which is 107 million. Okay. So for the LTP assumed a personnel cost increase of 887. This annual plan is assuming 3.3, so a difference of 2.4. And so broadly speaking, the reasons for that is number one, the LTP assumed a number of fixed term positions would have finished up by year 2 of the long term plan on a number of projects. The annual plan has identified that actually that's not the case. There's still a number of fixed term positions that are required for project specific work. It is also largely catching up and dealing to a deficit that we've had in our personal budget when we had a very competitive Wellington market. So we had high staff turnover, we had staff going into Wellington, very high salaries in Wellington. Yes, we had to make some small adjustments to the living wage, but predominantly that $2.4 million is looking at our personnel costs today and recognising that we don't have the budget sufficient for that, and it is largely fixing deficits going back 2 or 3 years. We are having to onboard staff at higher salaries that we budget because of the competitive labour market. Then we've got depreciation, so we've actually revised we've had a look, LTP said uplift of 2.8. We've got a slightly lower uplift in the annual plan, and that's because we're not forecasting to deliver the full capital works program this year. We're looking at being underspent against capital works program, which means that depreciation, there's a slight relief on depreciation. We are still doing a revaluation, but we are projecting at this stage slight relief to the increase in depreciation. The unfunded depreciation, no change in assumption. We are closing that unfunded depreciation gap. Then our interest, the LTP assumed interest of 4.09%. We know interest rates have come down. We look at our loan book, we look at the cost of our debt, we've revised that down to 3.8. So slight reduction in our actual cost of interest. And our interest is falling slightly because we're not taking on as much debt because we're not delivering the full CapEx program. We're almost delivering the CapEx program, but so it's just a slight adjustment there. The inflation, this is from Burl. We've updated our inflation. Our inflation cost pressures are actually going up. Again, our goods and services are not household goods; they're specific, and that's guided by Burl. And every council in the country applies the Burl indices. Then we looked at the other movements. So just asked for a little bit more information on that. So we assumed a cost increase of 985. That's gone to 1.5, so it's an uplift of 611 from the assumption. The slide is saying, look, it's to do with software licensing, power and security. So look, a lot of our fixed costs are going up. Our energy costs are going up, just like households' energy costs are going up. Our security costs, but most of that relates to our software licenses. So we have Office 365. The Microsoft Office suites have gone up. And so that is an uncontrollable cost for us. So it's Microsoft 365. It's a whole suite of products that enable staff to do what they need to do, to work remotely. So it's also a bit of resilience built into that. But fundamentally, what we do year on year is we do what's called a true-up with Microsoft. We have so many staff, we have so many licenses, and those license fees change year on year, and we have to do a true-up. So a lot of that relates to our Microsoft licenses. So that's the other movements. The older person's housing I've spoken about. We're anticipating 1 month delay. We thought that the transfer would be in December. We're now projecting. We're assuming in this annual plan it's going to happen in January. So we're actually having to pay. The reduction in the rates is less because we have one more month of rates funded expenses. As I've said, NZTA, the capital renewal revenue increase, the work program has been revised. We're not doing as much work, which means we're not getting as much subsidy. We're applying less of that funding to operating costs, and that's having an upward pressure on our rates. Then we have worked with our councillors. We've talked through a whole lot of rates reduction options, low risk, and that comes out at just under $3.1 million, and we've taken that out of the budget, and we'll get to that later on in the presentation. We've talked about the Taumata Arawai and the Commerce Commission. It's this council's share of their costs that's been done to us. So we have to absorb those costs. And so what that does, if we looked at the LTP, our total rates revenue would be $116,140,000. That's slightly higher. It's $204,000 higher for the annual plan. It's sitting at $116,344,000 for 25-26, which translates to 8.3% before growth. When we take growth off, so in other words, what is the increase for existing ratepayers? That translates to 6.9. So the water levy increase have really largely been offset by the slightly higher growth than what we forecast. So having higher growth is good. So those are the differences between those waterfall slides and some rationale. I think Martin might have a question.
Sorry, I'll go to you in a second, Martin. I just want to check in with Jocelyn first. Does that answer your question about the activities that we went through, or do you want a bit more detail?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Great. Wonderful, thanks. Martin?
Yeah, two questions. First of all, with the interest, the long-term plan assuming 4.09, projecting estimates 3.8, we had quite a significant difference in the pre-funding, or the interest that we were able to reduce our interest take by the pre-funding process. How does that fit in to this equation? Because I would have thought that would have sort of countered any rates increase as such. No, not rates increase, interest increase.
Yeah. So,
It's a good question.
so when we start to project and forecast our net interest costs, we look at our interest revenue less our interest expense. Our interest revenue is derived from our pre-funding.
Yep.
So currently we have $80 million of pre-funding on term deposit, and that's all locked in. So we know exactly what we're getting from that, less what our interest expense is. Now, just because the Reserve Bank is reducing interest rates, it actually takes 6 to 9 months to translate through, because actually what everyone's doing is anticipating the market movement, so it's dropping the rate. So we borrow everything through the LGFA, so we can model quite confidently what we think our interest expense will be. So we're seeing a reduction in cost and expense, but our revenue is pretty much locked in. Because you put them on term. So pre-funding is you draw down money, you put it on term deposit when your debt renews. So that's pretty much fixed. So that hasn't really changed. So what we're showing in this slide is our net interest cost, which is our interest revenue less our interest expense. The change variable is our interest expense, because interest rates are coming down, but they don't come down overnight.
Yeah, and it's already factored in.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. The other questions around the depreciation, the revaluation. We're constantly revaluating, so that is constantly going up as a figure. Will we ever be on top of our depreciation as such? Because we can get on top of our unfunded depreciation, but we do a revaluation, if you like, and there's another $3 million being added in as such. If we're doing 100 million, that's a starting point of 3.5% before we even kick off.
Yeah, thank you. Yes and no. So the LTP makes an assumption around what that revaluation increase is going to be, and it's largely actually driven by inflation indices. What we do see year on year is we sometimes see a revaluation increases of 20, 30, 35%. So it depends on the nature of the assets that we're revaluing. We've seen huge increases to the rates for the Three Waters, huge increases to the rates for the roading. So the short answer is we try and be as accurate as we can in terms of the uplift of depreciation from revaluation and the works that we're completing. You can be on top of it if when you look at your budgets and you say, well, we are fully funding depreciation. And that's why you have the annual plan process. So at this stage, we estimate it's $2.8 million, and we're becoming more and more accurate on what the likely, and because we do those revaluations year on year, the extent of the change is becoming less and less. When we used to do it 3 yearly, the actual impact of that revaluation was sometimes way above what we had anticipated. But because we do it year on year, the delta is becoming less and less. But principally, if the council fully funds depreciation year on year, yep, you can get on top of depreciation, but it does impact your rates. It does increase your rates. It's one of our biggest costs.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I guess you can get on top of it, but it's always going to cost.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, those chickens will always be roosting.
Just something to add is, one of the other alternatives is potentially 1 year reduce your capex program. The more assets that you build and renew, the greater your depreciation will be.
Yeah, but then you risk not having the infrastructure that you need for your growing population, Mark. But I guess that's another department. Have you been listening to this, Sean?
We need to spend more money, I think, on that area.
Yeah, infrastructure says we need to spend more, not less. Okay, let's carry on.
All right. Okay, so as I said, without doing the activity review, our rates revenue requirement for 25-26 reached 10.1%. And we knew that that wasn't a number that we could table, so we undertook an activity review and worked with the council through that. So the very first thing we did is we came up with a prioritisation framework. So the idea, so council has 16 activities, and it's the work that we do. It's what we deliver, categorised in activities. So we went, okay, well, what we need to do is we need to look at the budgets within those activities, and the prioritisation framework is what's mandatory versus non-mandatory. So what do we legally have to do, and what is there anything that we don't legally have to do? Are those costs related to the 4 well-beings? Are those costs related to the council's top 10 priorities, or are they nice to have? So look at the overall budgets and classify, what category does that fit into? And then we also went, well, let's overlay on top of that high-level principles, which is it equitable? Is it affordable? Is it financially prudent to even be doing that? And so that was the lens that each GM looked at and did an activity review. And then we actually looked at a whole lot of other things. The guiding principles around the way we work, that was just guiding us to apply common sense and I actually identify options to put on the table. Thanks, Paul. So what that translated into was quite a long list of options. And we thought, well, we better try and before we go to council, we need to actually rank this long list. There's a whole lot of options, but we need to actually rank them by risk: low risk, medium risk, and high risk. And so, as a senior leadership team, what the risk rating that we employed was we deemed a rates reduction opportunity as low risk if it was relatively easy to do, you could strip the money out of the budget, it could come out permanently, and it wouldn't impact the levels of service and probably wouldn't have a negative reaction from the community. Medium risk was something that still relatively easy to do, but it may not necessarily be permanent. You may not necessarily be able to take it out of budgets permanently from the LTP, so all 9 years. And there may be an impact on levels of service, and it may actually not be well received by the community. And then we looked at a whole lot of initiatives that we would classify as high risk. So very difficult to take out of the budget because actually you might take the budget out, but actually the chances of actually not incurring those costs were slim to none. You would definitely, by doing that, you would definitely impact on your levels of service, and by doing that, it would definitely be met with some sort of negativity with the community. So that's why it was deemed high risk. So we went through our long list and we classified low, medium, and high. And then, of course, the next part of that process is before we came to the table, we needed to quantify. Well, how much money did each of these opportunities equate to? So and we had a minimum and a maximum. And where we sort of got to is I'm going to focus on the low, because the low was easy to do. You could take it out of the long-term plan, wouldn't impact on your levels of service, and wouldn't have any a high probability is there would be no negative reaction from the community. And so what that did, taking the minimum of that, we identified just under $3.1 million of rate reduction opportunities to table with the council, and it did impact a number of FTE positions. So $3.1 million equates to 2.9% of rates. And so once we had done that, we brought it to the table to discuss with council. Okay, this slide really just summarises it gives you a breakdown of what the $3 million of rate reduction opportunities were. I won't go into great detail about it. If you do want to know anything more, I'll go through the big ticket items. But if you want to go through any item that I probably not going to discuss, please do ask. But Generally speaking, of the $3 million, nearly $2 million relates to two big things. Number one, our personnel. So we looked at our personnel, we looked at the vacancies, we looked at our operations, and we identified 14 roles, whether they were vacant or still here, 14 roles that we could table with council to potentially no longer have. Then we looked at our fees and charges. We looked at our revenue and financing policy. We looked at our operations with the business. Effectively, could we charge more, particularly in our regulatory services? Were we within the range of the private funding that we should be getting from our revenue and financing policy? And we also set about to look at, are there opportunities for external funding, which could actually reduce our reliance on rates? The other big things, 259 in access and transport. We had a look at our budgets, which were for unplanned emergency works, and we scaled the costs of that back. The other big one, 207 relates to community support. So we looked at some legacy funding arrangements, and we challenged that, and we took that out of the budget, and we looked to better prioritise some unused community funding that we have. And then going down to 210 for recreation and leisure, we looked at our discretionary and medium-sized grants. We looked at which ones could we pause, and we also looked at our Toi Mahara funding, and we aligned our funding with the partnership agreement. So, very, very detailed review. This is a snapshot. This was a couple of days going through this with council. But in essence, the council found just under $3.1 million of options to reduce our rates revenue, which has been loaded into the draft 25-26 annual plan. Thanks, Paula. Okay, just wanted to talk to you about CapEx. So a little bit of a complicated slide, I apologise. So first and foremost, when we adopted the long-term plan, the first 3 years of the long-term plan, we took $100 million out of our capital works budget. And it was a desktop analysis. We just went straight through all the projects, and the cumulative impact of that was taking $100 million out. But what we agreed with the council is that we would manage within the 3-year envelope. So in other words, over the 3 years, we would spend the budget, the cumulative budget of the LTP, but within each given year, we may need to reallocate budget between projects. We may need to spend more or less in 1 year, but over the 3 years, we must balance to the LTP. And if you have a look at the moment, and this is going to be tabled at the Strategy Ops and Finance Committee meeting on the 15th of May, but just looking at the table at the top, so the LTP budget for year one was $75.4 million. This is still work in progress. We're forecasting that we're going to spend just under $72 million for the current financial year, which is an underspend of $3.5 million. The LTP has a CapEx budget of just under $75.6 million for 25-26. We're looking to carry over the unspent money, so because there's projects that are in train that need to continue. And at this stage, we're looking at a budget of in 25-26 of $83.9 million, so which is $8.2 million more than what we've got in year two's budget. But we're sticking to the rules. We're sticking to what we agreed with council, that we must balance within the 3-year envelope. So we're taking the view that if we looked at the LTP budget for years 1 and 2, that sums up to $151 million. And if we look at what we're forecasting to spend in year 1 and what we're currently forecasting to spend in year 2, that's $155.8 million. So we're currently 4.75 or $4.8 million higher than the cumulative 2-year budgets. And so we're still working on that. We're looking at what we can do with that, how we can get it back to the 155.8. But that's work that's still in progress. There's a capital projects board that's working through that, and there's a work in progress. So it's unbalanced by $4.8 million, but we are allowed to be unbalanced because we've said we're managing to the 3-year envelope. So we're working on that, and we're going to be bringing that back to the Strategy Ops and Finance Committee.
Yeah, just for clarity. So fully get the 3-year thing. I think that was a great decision. But what you're saying is at the moment, should we say that that's we're it's in a positive of 4.7, but we are working towards bringing that under control, should we say, by the end of the next financial year. So is that what I'm hearing there?
Yes.
Lovely, thank you.
Gets harder and harder, that last little bit, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Anybody else? No? We can move on.
I'm going to pass over to Paula, fees and charges.
Good afternoon all, Madam Mayor, councillors. Just to recap on the fees and charges, the majority were increased by 3.2% per the local government cost index inflation indices. And just the high level exceptions, the main exceptions we've got are in cemeteries. So we've got a proposed removal of the 15% discount given to funeral directors for collecting fees. We've got a more sophisticated cemetery software system, and so we're able to manage invoicing and collection through that. And we also consider the revenue and financing policy as well to make sure we are meeting that, so that gives us a favourable revenue impact. In the regulatory space, the theme is cost recovery. So in the regulatory space, we've got some increases to actually reflect officer time. I won't go through them all. In the resource management area, we've just proposed to remove the free pre-application meeting requests. So this is before the consent is lodged, so we would now be charging at the applicable hourly rate. We proposed that. Government introduced or approved the domestic food business levy for businesses under the national program and under food control plans. So that is a fee over 3 years that will be gradually introduced, and so we've had to put that in our fee schedule, and they also recommend that councils charge the collection fee, which is $12.65 including GST, so we've put that in. Again, in the cost recovery, libraries, just the new makerspace space, we're just making sure we're charging for materials used. Okay, and then in the infrastructure and asset management area and the hall hire fees, so again, we've looked at the revenue and financing policy. We've got a private percentage to fund of between 10 and 20%, and we need to make sure we're within that band. So we've had to propose to increase fees by up to 10%, and that ranges between $1, $1.15, $3 per hour, depending on the size of the facility. We've also got the new pop-up in Waikanai, Main Road, so we've got some new fees put in there to be able to charge that for start-up businesses, short-term, high basis. And access and transport, again, cost recovery, just increasing the corridor access fee to around 2.5 hours of what it would take an officer's time. And the 3 water space, again, more cost recovery. We've also looked at neighbouring councils, and we're within range. We're not at the top by any means. And just in the filling point card fee, and there's a lot of administration behind that, checking on the card readers, maintenance, that sort of thing. So we've had to increase that by up to 30%. And then again, in wastewater and water, it's more certainty. It was quoted per site, and now we've got some certainty over what the connection, disconnection fees are, so users will know with more certainty. So that's a very high level summary of the increases, if anyone's got any questions.
Any questions?
Yeah, Paula, I was just wondering about the practicality of a pre-consent meeting and the charge. How do you charge for that? I've enjoyed wasting council officers' time for 40 years now and given up. Do you still pay for it if you walk away and say, oh, look, I just won't do it. I won't do that scheme?
I think I'll hand you over to Chris on that one.
I don't want to get into that detail too much.
Just on the removing of the 2 free hours. If people want to walk away, they don't want to pursue it, or they're still going to get charged.
Thank you. Yeah, I think as we are thinking about how we work across the organisation and we are supporting, and I will say particularly large developments that are coming through, and more complex development that's coming through, we're wanting to ensure that effectively those who benefit pay for that service. And we are finding that it is becoming more complex generally. People who drop down to the front counter to have a chat will still be able to have a chat to somebody. We have somebody who effectively is a duty planner. We're not removing that support. We're talking about the kind of engagement that we have where support from across the organisation's occurring. It's not one person. It's usually a handful of people. And we think, given that we are incurring a lot more growth with around 5,000 new houses planned over the next 5 years, that it's important to make sure that we're appropriately thinking about who's paying for that. So that's where that kind of came from.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Cofer?
Oh, sort of.
So-
I can't
so
see
thi-
the
I think-
practicality. You come in and have a consultation, and then you go away and rework it and then bring it back. And you do that several times, and okay, it's ready for an application. You must be keeping some semblance of time for those pre-meetings and invoicing it somehow before you actually kick off and do a formal application. I'm just wondering about I don't want to use your time though too much. This is about the long-term plan.
Yeah, well, what I may say is that if you're interested to understand more about that, happy to provide further information offline.
Thanks.
I think the premise for this change was back to wanting to ensure that we'd thought, and I guess a more consistent and standardised way about that point around who benefits pays, and not to reduce the ability to engage with us. Just as I will say that Strategy Ops and Finance, we're going to be talking about the improving our regulatory system work that's underway, and talking a bit more about how we invoice and what we get up to will form part of that. So we'll provide more information through those kinds of mechanisms.
Yeah, thanks. I think the having a duty planner at the front office there is probably the best thing which you're doing. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's still existing. So it's communicating this so it's clear to people like Councillor Cofer who are accustomed to the current system. When are they going to start paying? It won't be when they approach the front counter. If not, then when will it be? I think just providing some clear information about that will be really good, which people get up front, so they don't get any unexpected invoices. We know that people don't like those. None of us do.
So thank you. So moving to the next slide, this is a new addition to our performance report this year. It's just showing the cost of what we do in a slightly different way. So it's really just doing the same. We continuing this into the draft annual plan. So this really just sets out the total operating costs, the total operating costs of the services that council provides, and that equates to $135.8 million. We offset that by the fees and charges and other revenue that we receive. So there's $21.8 million of funding that we get to apply towards our operating costs, and leaves us a net cost of $114 million, which is funded by rates. And then what we're doing is we're just trying to display what are our total costs for ratepayers per week. So at the moment, it's been divided. There's 25,600 rating units. So we're classifying a rating unit to be a ratepayer, and it's just giving you a breakdown of what each activity costs per week. So it doesn't. There's 114 million, and the waterfall chart's 116. And the delta there, it's largely the central government rates rebates that we get. So in other words, we actually charge rates. We put in rates rebates applications for members of our community and actually get that back from the Crown. This next slide, slide 16, this is our median rate examples. So we've always asked to, for our annual plans and our long-term plans, we're asked to show, well, what does it mean for certain properties across the district? So there's no such thing as an average property, so we're using median properties. So that's a list of the highest valued properties down to the lowest, and the median is the midpoint. And the rates team have calculated if these were the rates, what would be the rates on each of these properties. And this table does show the increase and the decrease of these median properties. It's residential across the wards, it's rural, and we have commercial. And there's an explanation in the slide about why rural have actually got a negative, or their rates increase is negative. And that's detailed in the annual plan information brochure, which is hitting letterboxes, or has already hit letterboxes. So I'll go to the next slide. I'm just conscious of the time. So the next steps is we're into our communication campaign for the annual plan. So we have worked with an annual plan oversight panel. We have developed a brochure which is included in the fourth quarter rates invoices. It explains what's in the 25-26 annual plan, what the council have done to actually have rates increases at 6.9%. Provides more information. It also does allow, if you would like to give some feedback, if ratepayers would like to give us some feedback, it basically describes how to give that feedback. So that's already underway. In addition to the information brochures, we have information on social media, we have information on everything Kapiti, plus we have a lot of information on our website under the annual plan. So there's plenty of information available. The council is meeting on the 29th of May to consider the draft annual plan, and if it's the will of the table, the council will adopt the 25-26 annual plan. The legal requirements is the annual plan must actually be adopted before you can set rates for the following year, and so assuming the annual plan is adopted, there will be a paper to council to set the rates for 25-26. And then in addition to that, there will be a separate paper which will go through the detail of fees and charges, the exceptions, the new fees, an explanation of why there are exceptions, and the council will also adopt the fees and charges for 25-26. And we adopt the fees and charges early because of our dog registrations. We give our officers more time to communicate what the new charges are, and we're adopting our annual plan early so that we can load our budgets and be ready for 1 July. And that is it. Happy to take questions.
Cool. So just looking at, can I have the communications timeline back up?
Sure.
So when is the May rates reminder? Will people have enough time to get that and to have a look at the brochure and get in touch with us?
We believe so. So in terms of our rates invoices, our fourth quarter rates invoices always go out in the second month of the quarter. So we're keeping the same process. The information brochure is 2 pages. So we believe there's enough time, as it's not formal consultation.
No,
we
I'm
do
aware
believe
of
we've
that.
got enough time to receive and respond to feedback.
Yeah, it's not a huge amount of reading to do, really. Any other questions?
Yeah, just a quick one. The table on page 15.
Or comments?
I recall you saying on one occasion that when it comes to the annual plan production, there'll be more detail provided on the breakdown on that table. Is that still the case? So is it going to be possible for people to drill down on some of those headings to see what underlies them?
Look, at this stage, no, but that's something we can take offline and just so it's not meant to be digitally interactive. So, for example, they won't be able to go click on access and transport, and then it breaks down all the costs and expense. This is
Yeah,
just
not
a
necessarily
summary.
digitally, but I just thought there would be more detail in the actual annual plan itself.
Oh,
rather than
sorry.
budget settings.
Yes, there is more detail. So the annual plan has to show each activity.
Yeah.
There is a funding impact statement for each activity, which will break
That's
down
right.
the budgets. Plus, there's a capex program.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
So-
so each of those totals will be expanded out on in the annual plan.
Absolutely, yes.
Yep.
It's a mandatory requirement that we
Mm.
actually break it out. Sorry, I thought
Yeah.
you were referring, will this
Oh,
table
well, yeah,
be
yeah.
expanded?
Well, it'd be ideal if you could go onto the website and click on it, yeah, but
Yes, no,
yeah,
no.
Sorry, probably used the wrong word. But
No, there's there's prescribed funding impact statements for each
Yeah, yeah,
activity,
that's
which
right.
sets
Yeah,
out
yeah.
all the funding, all the capital
Yep.
expenditure, and all of the operating expenditure. And then there's another section on capital expenditure, which shows for each activity what is the renewal capex, what is the upgrade capex.
So if people have concerns that we're spending money on things inappropriately, they can give us that feedback, but it's not a consultation process, but we do welcome feedback on those matters.
Absolutely, and we'll be collating that feedback. So any feedback that we get, we'll be collating, and that'll form part of the paper that comes to council.
Yeah, and just the other thing is there's a lot of discussion around the four well-beings and the impact on rates. So when you look at this table, I guess my impression of that, which I think it's an excellent breakdown, is that the four well-beings, while they are, I guess you could say, significant, they don't have a major impact on our rates. I don't know whether there's any way of quantifying it. It would be really interesting to know what the cost is of meeting our obligations for the four well-beings. Is it achievable, or is it too complex?
I'll chip in. I guess if you think about economic, environmental, cultural, economic, actually, if you look at the first three, which are water services, without water services, you don't have an economy. So it would really come down to how you define well-beings. I know this government has talked about removing the well-beings. They are still in legislation. They haven't been removed.
Yep.
Yeah, and so that's a good point, right? So if you think about what we focus on here in Kapiti, it is about doing core services, delivering those core services really well. And so for my mind, from an economic and actually an environmental and a cultural perspective, those water services are key to those well-beings. And so if you remove the well-being, those water services still remain key to the to the well-being of a community. So it would be difficult, I would think, to break them out, but it's just my perspective and how I would interpret the well-beings and how they actually are key to the core services that council
It's
provide.
too much of a grey area, really, as to what's the well-being and what isn't.
Yeah.
What's a core service?
Yep, I would. Yeah, that would be my argument, but I'm happy for Mark to correct or add to that.
What he said.
Nothing further to add. Spot on.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that either. That's a very good answer, Darren. Martin?
Yeah, look, two questions. One's fairly basic, I guess, and it's just a general, want to get an understanding. But we send out a water bill, okay, and it's got a fixed charge and it's got a volumetric charge. How does that fit into those top three figures?
So the total costs of providing potable water sit in the water management activity.
Yep, I get that. That's the cost. But we also have an income that comes in from supplying those services, which aren't rate funded. We get a separate water bill.
So the amount that we recover. So if we look at slide number 15. So
Can we go back to that slide, please?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, page 15. Yep.
Yep.
Great,
So
thank you.
water at the top, $13.6 million is net operating cost. That's what we recover by way of rates for water. Half of that is a fixed charge, half of that is a volumetric charge.
Okay, taking just what you've just said into consideration there, and sorry to digress a little bit, we're talking full cost recovery with regards to the water entity when it's set up, which will just be billing everybody for that operating cost. Is that right?
So we bill them currently, and we use volumetric and fixed charge to recover. It's just not shown in the revenue. The revenue, that green column in the middle, is more external. So that will be the final reads and the fees and charges that we charge, I assume, to makes up that 300K. The 13.6 million is actually recovered from, we're calling it rates, but it's the volumetric and the fixed charge.
So that volumetric and fixed charge is picked up in what you call the average cost per rating unit per week. Is that right? It's not separated
Yes.
out?
Well, it's the recovery of the 13.6 million, yes. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So we haven't separated out what that volumetric charge is separate to, well, say, your rates bill as such. I can just
not
see
for this.
questions coming around this, because obviously this is high profile. Everyone's going to go, what, we only recover 0.3 million with the bill charging. I just do wonder whether that needs to be shown slightly differently. I don't know. Because if I just look at that, I'm saying, oh, okay. So I receive a water bill and it only equates to 0.3 million. So am I about to get hit with a massive bill when we change over as such?
Yeah, good. Look, good point. Good point. It's absolutely right. So 13.6 is recovered by way of a fixed and a volumetric. The volumetric per household will differ. So if you it's making an assumption. So good point. Good point. It's the simplicity of trying to break down our services to a weekly cost. In the property examples on slide 16, we do make an assumption that a residential property uses 255 cubic metres.
Mhm.
So there's more rigour around the cost of the water rates when we get to the property example. So it was really just, the previous slide is really just trying to set out all the services we provide.
Oh,
and
don't
very
get me wrong,
high
it's
level what it
great
costs
to
per
have
week.
that.
But you're absolutely right. It's not entirely accurate because of the volumetric.
Oh, look, I'm just saying that we've got some explanations on the right-hand side that just
Really
might be,
good pickup. Yeah,
just might
got one
be
in there.
worthwhile
Yeah,
explaining that a bit
absolutely.
better.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the pickup.
And the other one is economic development. So there is a operating cost here of 2.8 million allowed for. There's been some figures banded around recently in social media that figure's around 8 million as such. And so we don't have any other figures that feed into the economic development charge, if you like. We recover that through the business rate, is that correct?
Thank you. So look, as per this slide, the cost of the economic development activity, the net cost is $2.7 million. That is fully recovered by way of rates.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of, so when we jump into rates, we recover the economic development costs through two of our rates. One's a commercial rate and one's a district-wide general rate.
Yep.
So the revenue and financing policy gives us the split. We should be recovering between 40 and 80% of the total cost of economic development through the commercial rate. We're currently sitting at 25%. But the revenue and financing policy currently provides that council must recover economic development 100% through rates. It's exactly what we're doing.
Yep.
So the fact that we're not within the range of the commercial rate is sensitive to the commercial sector at this stage.
Rightio. So that figure of, so just getting it really, really clear, the recovery, or should we say the billing of the economic development rate, is a combination of commercial and district-wide,
Yes.
with a lean towards commercial.
No,
Sorry?
more. So it's 100% rates funded. More of the economic development charge is being recovered by the district-wide general, so
Right.
by the residential sector. But the revenue and financing policy allows us to increase the commercial rate recovery to 40%. We're currently sitting at 25%, so more is loaded on the district-wide general rate. And it does have differentials.
Right, okay. And sorry, what was it currently at? 20?
It's 25%.
but we've got leeway to take it up to 40.
Yes, the revenue and financing policy allows you, so the band is between 40 and 80%. So you can take it up to, so it's meant to be a minimum of 40% recovered through the commercial rate, maximum of 80. We're currently recovering 25%.
Yep. And the reason behind that is because economic development's not just a business orientated thing, it's a general community thing as well.
That's right.
Is that right? Okay.
That's right.
Lovely. Thank you for the clarity.
Great, I'll just check online. Right, I'm not seeing any more questions. Was that the end of the slides?
That is the end of the slide.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I think we're really clear where we are, how we've got to where we are, where we're going next. We've uninflated, we've reinflated to look at the forecast inflation and done everything else we need to do. So thanks everybody for coming along this afternoon, and those of you online, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Ka
Thank you.
kite.